Hey everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to Cinefessions, where we talk all things media. So if you guys watched my anticipated releases video for the month of February, you might remember that at number 1 came a duo of wrestling documentaries. One of them is what we're talking about today. This is Hitman Hart, Wrestling with Shadows from 1998. This one comes from Vinegar Syndrome via Canadian International Pictures, one of the companies that they partner up with on some of their releases. So, does this hold up today? Does this documentary that I believe I probably called one of the best ever, one of the most important ever, does it hold up today, now many years later? Well, let's talk about it. Before we get into it though, if you guys have a quick second, please hit that like button down below. That engagement really does help me out. But with that said, let's not waste any more time at all. Let's dive right into my Blu-ray review of Hitman Hart, Wrestling with Shadows. I'll start off with a quick unboxing just so you can see what's included. So I did pre-order this like immediately after it was announced. So I did manage to get the limited edition slipcover version, which is beautiful. The pink on this is just perfect for Bret Hart. I love that. So I'll take this off. It has the same front cover work on the one side and then the information on the back. And then you do have some kind of small lights on the disc there. I'm actually going to leave that in, and I'm going to flip this around so you guys can see the alternate cover art, because this is what I am rocking and I love it. So let me get this flipped around here. This is beautiful. This is the original cover art for this. I remember this like on the VHS release of this. I love it. It's just so nostalgic to me. So cool. And then also on the inside, you do get this really cool pamphlet, and this is an interview with the producer, Sally Blake, and you do get some pictures included in there as well. So yeah, pretty nice release. I love how it looks. The material on this is just as good as you would expect from Vinegar Syndrome. So yeah, definitely love what I'm seeing here. I'll try to keep my thoughts on the documentary itself a little on the brief side, just because chances are you've seen this, you already know what it's all about, and two, everyone knows the Montreal Screwjob if you are any pro wrestling fan at all, because it's like the most infamous event in pro wrestling history, one of them at least. So we are following Paul J as he follows around Hitman Hart's last year with the WWF at the time, now of course the WWE, before he makes the move over to Ted Turner's WCW. I could get into all like the details behind it, but again, I'm going to assume you understand like the Monday Night Wars, you understand heel versus face, you understand that Bret Hart was a heel in America, but was like the biggest face around the world in every other country. And so the fact that they were in his hometown of Canada, he just didn't feel it was right to drop the belt to Shawn Michaels, who again, you probably know, have a very long and kind of negative history together up until this point. They just don't like each other. Shawn Michaels refused to drop the belt to Bret Hart. He ended up, losing his smile, that infamous "I lost my smile" speech that he does, and he goes away for a bit, and the title gets over to Hitman, and then he's asked to do the job for Shawn Michaels, and he doesn't want to do it. Rightfully so. And we followed that night, and they just happened to be filming. Basically, Paul J went in to film kind of the history of Bret Hart, and he just happened to come at the perfect time. This is just such a serendipitous event that we get so much of this on film, and that's what makes this documentary so damn powerful and important, because it gives that behind the scenes that in 1998 you were starting to see a little bit behind that curtain, but it wasn't quite pulled back to the level that it is here. Beyond the Mat is another one that really pulls back the curtain, but this one has even more access because Vince McMahon, when they were in good graces, he agreed to allow all the stock footage from the WWE. He agreed to be in it at one point, but that interview never happened. And so because they signed a contract, they were obligated to let all this footage be in there. And that's a whole nother story in itself that they talk about a little bit in some of the special features, which I found fascinating as well. What I do want to talk about with this though is why I find it so interesting, because Bret Hart kind of straddles that line between that old school comic book type character with, Macho Man Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, and the new breed of Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Ken Shamrock, if I can throw him out there. That more new school kind of more realistic feeling characters. He was the new generation of the WWF at the time. They were moving away from those comic book characters. Him and Diesel and characters like that were becoming more popular. And then, of course, by the end of this is when Stone Cold Steve Austin is about to make arguably the greatest ascent in pro wrestling history and make the company more money than it could ever dream of making. That's what happens, you know, in the following year after this. And so it's just such an interesting time for pro wrestling because the Monday Night Wars have heated up and they are trying to push each other. WCW and WWE are pushing each other to kind of push the envelope more and do more outrageous things. And Bret Hart didn't like that. He wanted this to be a more family-friendly thing because this is what he's grown up with. His family, which his parents had 12 kids, which just is mind-blowing to me that they had 12 kids, but they ran Stampede Wrestling in Calgary. And so it was always a family affair to him, and he didn't like the way that the business was going. And so he saw that the bad guys were becoming who the fans were cheering, and the good guys were not. They were the ones that were being booed. They were passé at that point. And so he was trying to make that transition as well as he could. But what's interesting is that he has that old school mentality that he really lived the character. Like, he wasn't really a character. He was Bret the Hitman Hart. That's just who he was. And so he was really proud of that. And I think that's what ultimately causes this crazy event to happen, is the pride that Bret Hart felt about this character, about who he was, and about what this character stood for. That's why he didn't want to lose the belt to Shawn Michaels in Montreal, which then causes this whole crazy chain of events, the Montreal Screwjob, to go down. But what I think is fascinating about this movie, even today, is just how it portrays Vince McMahon. He is very clearly the villain character in this, which he will use the Montreal Screwjob to create the Mr. McMahon character, which is, you know, the villain that catapulted the Attitude Era into just the, you know, unfounded success. But he uses this event to do that, and this paints him in that negative light. And I think this just help build that Mr. McMahon character, because he very clearly screws Bret. He lies to him saying they're going to do one thing when they do another. Not only does Vince lie to him, Shawn Michaels lies to his face, Triple H lies right to his wife's face, Earl Hebner swears on his kids' lives that he won't let this happen. The referee, he lies right to his face. Like, it's just fascinating to see all of this happen in real time. As someone who has grown up a professional wrestling fan and have been obsessed with it since, you know, the early 90s, this was a revelation to me when I watched it for the first time when it aired. I believe it was on A&E, I think is where it aired the first time. And I saw it then. I absolutely loved it. Now to have it in this form on Blu-ray, it was such a treat to go back and watch this again. And it holds up really well. Yes, there are some moments in this that feel like, this is like a made-for-TV documentary. It feels a little cheap, arguably, at points. Maybe a little saccharine at points. But it's still, overall, it works so well. And some of the messages that Bret Hart has are so applicable today that it blows my mind. At the end, after he's finally screwed out of the belt, he talks about how promoters treat the wrestlers as like circus monkeys, essentially, circus animals. But that circus animals' lives are actually treated better than professional wrestlers' lives. And like, yes, that still happens today. Vince McMahon still has independent contractors. Like, it is just such a sham. And it's just fascinating to see how relevant this film is now 25 years after its release, and how very little has changed, quite frankly. This is, without a doubt, the greatest professional wrestling documentary ever made. It is incredibly important for the lens that it cast on that era, for the curtain that it pulled back on the era of the time. That late 90s Attitude Era was just getting started, and this is arguably one of the reasons why that happens. It's just fascinating in here to see Bret Hart talk about how Vince said that a place like WCW would never know how to use him. And then again, we look back 25 years later, boy, was he right. Unfortunately, they didn't. And his career kind of just went on a downward spiral from there. And then, of course, he gets injured by Goldberg. And then in, 2002, I believe, he ends up having the stroke, which ends his career entirely. It is a fascinating look. Again, I've talked way too long. If you know this, you love it. And if you haven't seen it, you need to. Hitman Hart, Wrestling with Shadows, I will give 5 out of 5 stars. Let's talk about the AV side of this disc. So, without a doubt, the best I've ever seen this. This is a transfer that was restored from the Betacam Master. I don't even know what Betacam is, but they make this one look fantastic on Blu-ray. Again, I remember watching this back when it aired on TV. I think I recorded it on VHS so I could watch it over and over again. I remember renting it from like Blockbuster with this cover art on it on VHS, and I loved it. And without a doubt, this is the best. It is in full screen 1.33 to 1, which is the proper aspect ratio because, again, it was made for TV, so that's how things looked back then. And on the audio side, I thought it sounded great. I had no problems with this whatsoever. I don't even know what kind of track. It's a mono track, so not even stereo on this one. But again, you don't need it. It's totally fine. It's just talking head documentary. So yeah, thought this looked and sounded fantastic. Without a doubt, this will be the best this will ever look or sound in the future as well. So definitely recommend this one in terms of the AV quality. All right, now let's talk about the special features on this because that's really the reason to purchase this. So there are quite a few. I'm going to start with the commentary track. There is a commentary with Dave Meltzer from Wrestling Observer Newsletter, which again, if you know pro wrestling, you know Dave Meltzer, the one who created the infamous 5-star system or the star rating system. Sometimes he goes above 5 stars, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. Him and Bret Hart have a commentary track on it, which you guys know I'm not a commentary guy. This was excellent. I ate this one up. It was awesome. There's actually an additional special feature that just talks, it revisits the screw job itself, those like 13 minutes toward the end of the film, and Bret Hart adds additional commentary on top of it. If you're a fan like me, you will eat this up. It was awesome. There are a couple of archival interviews on here as well from what year? 2008. There's one with the director Paul J and one with Bret Hart. It's interesting because that's 10 years after the release of this, and so you get some kind of a quick look back, or a look back at 10 years prior as opposed to now where we see it 25 years later. And so it was interesting to see him talk about it then. There is a lot, like I say, a lot of ums and ahs. He does that a ton, Bret Hart does. I will mention with the Paul J interview, it's interesting, but toward the second half of that, and those are both like 22 minutes long, toward the second half of that, he really starts getting in on politics, which is going to turn a lot of people off because he is very clearly one political ideology versus another, at least from what I picked up from this very small clip. And it starts going into the political reign a little bit. So keep that in mind going into it. It happens. And the reason is because he's trying to promote his Real News network that I think was just starting or was started by the time this interview happened. And so keep that in mind. He does it a little bit also in the 2022 interview that he has, which is only about 11 minutes. The last couple minutes of that do get into political aspect of things just a little bit. But you have to keep in mind, Paul J., that's what he did for a living for a very long time. I forget the years. It was like a decade or 2 decades where he ran like the political show in Canada. So it's just ingrained in him. You're not gonna, I feel like he's the type of person that you're gonna talk to him and it's always gonna circle back to politics because that's what he knows. And so keep that in mind. It's not as heavy-handed as it is in the other old archival interview, but it's still there. And then we get, and I also have to mention that entire new one from 2022 with Paul J, it's out of focus. He has a microphone in front of him and the camera is focused on the microphone. He is a little bit out of focus in the back. It's just something to note. It was kind of annoying, but it didn't ruin anything. You're basically there to listen to him talk anyway. On top of that, we have the Bret Hart interview from 2022, clearly done via Skype. That was interesting. Again, just seeing him at 10 years past. Actually, if you watch the documentary, you're seeing him like days later. Then you see him 10 years later, and then you see him 25 years later. And I just thought that was very interesting to see. I really enjoyed those. Again, doesn't add a whole lot of new or unknown things if you're a big pro wrestling fanatic, but it's still interesting to see it come directly from the horse's mouth. And the final special feature on here is actually a second full-length documentary. Mind you, it's 46 minutes, but that's technically feature length. And this is The Life and Death of Owen Hart. Now, this one is from, I think, 1999. Yeah, 1999. So this was like a year after Owen Hart had passed away from the tragic accident of him falling from the rafters at the Over the Edge pay-per-view. And so the thing that this lacks, I guess, is that historical context where you can take time away and look back at it. It's not the definitive documentary on Owen Hart's life or his death. It's interesting if you've never seen it before, but it is one I've seen in the past. I did watch it again just to kind of refresh myself, and it's interesting to see the family's reaction and just how much of an impact that had on the whole family, and to see his life growing up and his kids and things like that. But it was really done for his widow, Martha. It wasn't really done for what felt like any other reason other than just to kind of do it for them, which is fine. That's totally acceptable, and I understand why they wanted it. But I would love something more current to kind of look back on it, go into more specifics on the actual accident itself, and call out, some of the lies that Vince McMahon has in the days following the accident, things like that. So it's an interesting documentary. It's an awesome bonus feature on here. If you haven't seen it, absolutely spend the 46 minutes and watch it. But it's not going to set the world ablaze at all, and it pales in comparison when comparing it to Wrestling with Shadows. But it's a really great special feature to add on there. So having watched all these, I'm going to give the special features on this disc 4.5 out of 5 stars. This release from Vinegar Syndrome and Canadian International Pictures is everything I hoped it would be, and then some. The special features on here, which is really the reason I wanted this, are phenomenal. It looks and sounds as good as you could ever hope. The packaging is fantastic. I love this release. It is absolutely worth owning. If you're a pro wrestling fan, you need it. If you are someone who has any interest at all in Bret Hart, the behind the scenes of professional wrestling, you don't know anything about the Montreal Screwjob, what a great place to start. For me, this release earns 5 out of 5 stars. I cannot recommend it enough. It is without a doubt got to be one of my favorite releases of the year so far, and I imagine I'll be able to say that by the end of the year as well. Vinegar Syndrome and Canadian International Pictures really knocked it out of the park with this one. All right, so those were my thoughts on Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows. I absolutely loved it. I devoured this disc as quickly as I possibly could, and I hope you guys enjoyed my thoughts on it. I feel like it was probably a little bit more rambly than it needed to be, but that's what happens when I start talking about wrestling or true crime. I start rambling. But anyway, I want to hear from you guys down in the comments below. Have you seen this one? Do you love this documentary as much as I do? Am I overselling it a bit too much? Let me know what your thoughts are on this and anything else down in the comments below. And also, let me know if you want to hear me do a review of The Glow, the story of the gorgeous ladies of wrestling. Let me know if you want me to do a review on that one, which also came out from Vinegar Syndrome last month. I'd be happy to if you guys are interested. But with that said, guys, that is going to do it. So before I go, if you have a quick second, hit that like button down below. That engagement really does help me out. And like I always say, I don't just talk movies, I talk all things media. Books, movies, video games, pro wrestling apparently. If it's media related, I'm interested in it. And if you are too, you might consider subscribing. All right, guys, so that's going to do it for today. I just want to say thank you all again so much for watching this one. And I want to encourage you to consume some media today. I'll catch you next time.